Previously on Quest for 2, we uncovered what may be one of the hidden secrets of the Infinity metagame, that maybe Emerald-Steel is good against dogs.
It appears that it suffers against Emerald-Steel. It's quite interesting actually. Maybe there's something to think about in greater detail for another video breaking down the matchup in like in like a week or something. Well, a week has passed and I have nothing better to talk about, so let's get it! Okay, so let's take a quick recap of the data as of this week for Infinity. If we look at the Amber Emerald matchup spread, which would largely comprise of dog style decks, whether they have Snowfort, Tramp, just generally aggro-based dog strategies, we can see that in best of one, Emerald-Steel is holding its own at 50-50 against it, where dogs on the play wins by 60% and dogs on the draw wins only 41% of the time, so that's pretty good for Emerald-Steel. But when we look at the best of 3 data, we can see that Amber Emerald is a 43% dog against Emerald-Steel. And if we break it down into the play draw, Amber Emerald is 48% on the play, which is still sub 50%, and 38% on the draw. Okay, so 2 things we can glean from this data. Firstly, the play draw disparity for the Emerald-Steel dogs matchup is greater than the average for the format as a whole. It's true if you compare for best of 1 and best of 3, which means that the player going first in this Dogs versus Emerald-Steel matchup has a bigger advantage than the average matchup in the metagame. The second thing that's pretty obvious and also very interesting, the reason why I wanted to make this video in the first place, is that Emerald-Steel performs way better in best of 3 than it does in best of 1, regardless of whether on the play or on the draw. And this is a very rare phenomenon. If you look at the other statistics, some decks may do better in best of 3, some decks may do better in best of 1, but the delta in performance is not as big as for Emerald-Steel. And so the question is why, right? And I guess this is partially linked to why I wanted to make this video in the first place, because historically, as in set 1 to set 8 core constructed before rotation of Fable, I don't generally recall Emerald-Steel being that great against aggro decks. But somehow here, it looks like it's doing very well, particularly in best of 3. And so the only reason why this would be the case that makes sense to me is that in the altar and in your inking decisions, when you're playing Emerald-Steel, there are several cards that gain tremendous value when you're playing against dogs, and therefore knowledge of the matchup in games 2 and 3 benefit you tremendously when you're playing out your games, regardless of whether you're on the play or on the draw. So what would some of these cards be? Well, let's take a look at one of the lists that came out in the past couple of weeks. The list I want to be looking at is RSG Anatidae's Green Steel Horsey list. I believe he's also called Donald, which we'll see on stream at the Enchanted Citrus Clash 10k Infinity event later on in this video. So what about this list is so much better on the play than on the draw, which is one of the first features that we talked about in the Emerald-Steel Dogs matchup. The first thing that obviously stands out is that shifting in the Diablo 3 is way better on the play than on the draw, because you get one more turn of an active Diablo to A, draw one more card, to quest one more time, to sing one more 3-cost song like Storm John or Strength. Second feature is that your 3-drops like Prince John and Ursula 3 are much better on the play, because these are generally quite slow cards. On the draw, them coming out on turn 3 tends to improve their relevance to the game quite significantly. And yeah, that's about it. I don't think there's anything else that stands out as being particularly better in the matchup on the play than on the draw. I guess if you're talking about Fort Dogs, which plays Tramp 7, the fact that your Prince John comes out on turn 3 before your opponent's turn 3 could mean that your Prince John is more likely to come out in the matchup before the Dog's Tramp, which means that apart from Diablo, you have one more way to significantly disincentivize a Tramp from being played in the form of a Prince John. Because, when they play Tramp and they draw a lot of cards, of course, if you have Diablo, you'll draw a lot of cards as well. But apart from the Diablo, because sometimes you don't always high roll into a Diablo on turn 2, turn 3, you have 3 more copies or 4 more copies of Prince John that you play on the turn before the Tramp 7, where after the Tramp 7 you draw the cards, they discard all the cards, then you get to draw the same number of cards that they discarded. Therefore, they can't play their Tramp 7. It could also very well be that Dogs, as the aggro deck starting one turn behind, is the difference maker rather than anything particular in Emerald-Steel. Though, of course, Diablo makes a big difference. Your 3 drops coming out and being impactful makes a big difference. But also, I think the last factor that makes a big difference is that an aggro deck being one turn behind without an inbuilt mechanism to catch up. Because if we look at the Fort Dogs list that we've been talking about, for example, they don't have Under the Sea, they don't have any quick removal. They are unable to interact with your questers in your Diablo because their characters are not evasive. And therefore, yeah, that might be the third factor as to why the delta in play draw is bigger in the Dogs Emerald-Steel matchup than it is for the other matchups in the metagame. Okay, so now second thing, what about this list is so much better once you know that your opponent is on Dogs? Diablo doesn't really matter because you're looking to Diablo every game anyway. The deck really doesn't function if you don't have an active Diablo. Ursula 3 becomes way better. It's a very fragile card in the face of Brawl, in the face of a Steel Song opponent with Strength and Zeus. But against Dogs, you know this fella's gonna be safe for at least one turn, which enables your Strength of the Raging Fire double songs with Ursula way more. So that's one card. Secondly, you know your muses are going to have infinite targets from the opponent to slow them down. So that's another important card. Maybe as I pointed out in the previous video, Dogs list now are starting to play Tramp 7, which means that they are also starting to play Grandmother Willow, which is inherently weak to let the Storm Rage on. So if you know that your opponent is on a Tramp 7 Grandmother Willow situation, you're more likely to let the Storm Rage on to go with your early Diablos to kind of slow them down significantly because Grandmother Willow's uninkable, they're forced to play it, right? In general, actually, if I look at this Emerald-Steel list, a lot of the cards are very polarized. So Ursula 2 is clearly horrible against Dogs. You almost never play it unless you really need to play a 2-drop. Lenny's pretty bad. Pete's pretty bad, though if you need to play something on 3, you play it. Headless Horseman is okay, but it's nothing compared to Muses. You know, the songs Keep the Ancient Way is terrible. I'm Still Here, pretty terrible. Bruno, also fairly terrible. So maybe it's not necessarily that it's any card that's super good. Of course, I have pointed out some that are very good. But you also know what of your cards are very bad. So you're always in a position to play very impactful cards because you ink the cards that are terrible, which you have a fair number of, and you always play the cards that are very good, which you also have a good number of. Okay, so I think we've learned all we can from just staring at the deck list. We figured out Ursula 3 is pretty good. We figured out that the deck has a lot of polarized cards that are very bad, so you know precisely what you're supposed to ink and alter for every single game. Now let's kind of test our observations by looking at actual gameplay in the Enchanted Citrus Clash. As we know, Donald or RSG and Natide finished in second place with this exact Emerald-Steel list. And when I combed through the live stream, it turns out that he played Amber Emerald opponents twice. So we have 2 best of 3 series to look through to see how he navigated it. Of course, he probably won them because he finished in second place after all, losing to Lorganes on Amber-Steel in the finals. And so maybe we'll be able to gain further insight as to what exactly makes this Emerald-Steel deck so good against Dogs, particularly in best of 3. Let's get it! Alright, first best of 3 set against Alec and Donald playing Emerald-Steel as discussed. Both players are on 5-1. Alec is going first. Both players alter 5 cards, keeping only 2. So Alec goes first on Dogs. He inks a Nani, plays a The Prince, a new card from Wilds Unknown, and passes. So on Donald's turn, he knows he's playing against something aggressive. He inks a 4-drop Headless Horseman, plays a Diablo 1, and sees a hand of 2 Grandmother Willows, a Mickey Mouse 4, a Daisy Duck, and a Chief Powhatan. A pretty decent hand from Alec. It looks like he's going to ramp 1, 2, and then play some 4-drop after that. He has no tramp, so that's what he's consigned to do. So on his turn, he has to choose what 4-drop he wants to ink, basically, and what 4-drop to play. He chooses to ink the Chief, plays a Grandmother Willow, and plays a Daisy Duck. He thinks about whether he wants to quest if he's the Prince, decides he doesn't because he doesn't want to give it up to a shifted-in Diablo, and passes the turn over to Donald. On Donald's turn, he inks a Keep the Ancient Ways, another bad card in the matchup, plays a Diablo Stone Servant, and shifts in Diablo 3, discarding what I believe is, and then along came Zeus, quests with his Diablo, and passes the turn back to Alec, drawing a card on Alex's draw step due to Diablo's effect. On Alec's turn, he makes the play that was forecasted in his hand since turn 1. He inks a Bobby Zimruski, plays the Mickey Mouse, coming into play exerted, and quests out with his characters, reducing the strength of all of Donald's characters, preventing them from being able to effectively challenge Alec's board. Between playing Chief Powhatan or playing Mickey, which is what he basically made a decision on turn 2, he decided to play Mickey Mouse, which makes sense because Mickey Mouse Quest for 2, between the two, it's fairly negligible, their effect, because it's not like Emerald-Steel is a challengey deck anyway, so it's not like either of their effects are that relevant, but one Quest for 2 and one doesn't, so makes perfect sense. On Donald's turn, he inks an Ursula 3 to play an Ursula 3, and he interestingly decides to sing Strength of a Raging Fire with a Diablo to take out the Mickey Mouse. The strength may be something you want to save for Ursula 3 typically, so it's quite likely he has a second one in hand, or perhaps Let the Storm Rage On, because that would be good against Alex's board because of the Grandmother Willow and the Prince. On Alex's turn, his hand is Grandmother Willow, Ursula, and Lady 5, so he doesn't really have an option, but at least he has the Lady 5 to take away the song. He plays a Grandmother Willow, plays an Ursula, and sees a hand of a Diablo and 2 Max Goofs. Firstly, that's horrible because there are no songs to be taken by the Ursula, but also now he knows that Donald can return the Strength of the Raging Fire from his discard to his hand with a Max Goof and then sing it with Ursula to take out 2 of his characters. Extremely bad position for Alec here. What can he do? He's kind of stuck. He can't quest because it gives away free traits for Donald's characters, but if he doesn't quest, he doesn't gain any lore, and he's going to lose 2 of them to the strength on the next turn. He ultimately decides not to quest. On Donald's turn, he inks the Pete that he drew for turn, spends 4 ink to play the Max Goof, returns the Strength of a Raging Fire, but instead of singing it with his Ursula, he sings it with his Diablo to take out a Grandmother Willow. An extremely smart play, because if he sung it with the Ursula 3, he would lose that Strength of a Raging Fire, which is his only damage song, for good. It goes back at the bottom of his deck. But now, because it remains in his discard, and remember he has another Max Goof in hand, he can now then do, on the following turn, Max Goof, return strength, and then finally sing it with Ursula 3 to get maximum value out of the Strength of a Raging Fire. An extremely good play because he knows that Alec is not really putting on lore pressure. On Alex, as we saw on his turn, he had to pass a turn back over to Donald because he drew another Lady 5. His hand now is 2 Lady 5s. With 2 Lady 5s in hand, he can't play anything. He can't quest either because he loses the characters. Game's pretty much a wrap at this point. On Donald's turn, he plays another Diablo, sings finally the Strength of a Raging Fire, taking out the Daisy Duck and the Grandmother Willow, and starts questing with his characters. On Alex's turn, he draws a Tram 7 that he can't play to go with his 2 Lady 5s and decides to scoop it up because this game is a wrap. So from the game 1, what we saw was obviously Donald got the Diablo shift in, which gives him the card flow that he needs to keep playing, but the whole Ursula 3 Max Goof thing is extremely effective against Alec. Ursula 3 because Alec has no way to disrupt the Ursula from at least getting off 1 activation of a double song, and with the Max Goofs, he's able to save his songs from a potential Ursula 2 from Alec. So we can see despite going second, this Emerald-Steel deck really does have legs against Alec. Also note, Donald inked a lot of cards that were not good in the matchup. He inked a Headless Horseman 4, he inked a Keep the Ancient Way, he inked a Pete. Because he's going second, he gets the benefit of that information, but that's again, as I mentioned earlier, a feature of this deck in this matchup. You know very clearly what cards in the matchup are good and bad. There are not that many 50-50, 6.5 out of 10 cards. Everything's either a 3 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10, which enables you to play the deck very optimally without requiring as much skill to play optimally in this matchup as, say, some other deck like, say, Ruby Amethyst or Blurple. Alright, now let's go on to game 2. Alec is going first. He decides to alter 5 cards and Donald decides to alter 4. On Alec's turn 1, he inks a Tram 7 to play the Prince and passes the turn. Inking Tram 7 seems okay knowing your opponent is a Diablo deck. On Donald's turn, he inks a Headless Horseman again, plays a Diablo 1, and sees a hand of the Prince, Ursula 2, Tramp 2, Gogo Tamago, and Lilo. Gogo Tamago kept probably to check a shifted Diablo from Donald, which is a fine play in this matchup. For Alec, it's your basically only evasive in your deck. Back over to Alec's turn. He inks the Lilo and plays an Ursula to see Donald's hand. He sees Prince John, Ursula 2, Muses, Pete, and Ursula 3. And of course, the I'm Still Here, which Donald just discarded because that's the only song that is available to be taken. Alec knows the coast is clear from a Diablo, so he decides to quest with his Prince and passes the turn back over to Donald. On Donald's turn, he doesn't have a Diablo to shift, unfortunately, so he just plays the Ursula 2. He knows he probably has no targets to take because this is a dog's deck after all. He sees a bunch of cheap characters and then passes the turn back over to Alec. On Alec's turn, he elects not to ink. He plays the Prince and Lady, quests out of his characters, and passes the turn back to Donald. On Donald's turn, he inks a Headless Horseman 8, trades in both of his characters into the Prince, plays an Ursula 3, passes the turn. On Alec's turn, he does the responsible thing of playing an Ursula 2 to check the hand. No songs there. And then instead of trading, he decides to go all in for a quest out, playing a Tramp 2 to buff his Lady to get in for the extra 3 lore, questing out with the rest of the characters, and inks a Rapunzel 4 in the process as well, bringing his lore total to, I believe, 11. On Donald's turn, he inks a Pete for turn and plays a Muses, and then goes into the tank. Turns out he decided to sing Has Set My Heart, a song that banishes an item but does nothing on this board state. He decides to sing it and recur it again with Ursula so that he gets 2 triggers off of the Muses to return the Lady and the Ursula 2 back to Alec's hand, and then he uses his characters to take out the Prince, using Muses as board control. On Alec's turn, he inks an Ursula because he knows there's no songs really left in Donald's hand to take. Any song that he draws, he'll play immediately. So he inks the Ursula, plays out a bunch of threats, decides to quest out, and passes the turn. On Donald's turn, he plays a Diablo, and then just starts trading characters to take down Alec's board. He takes out the Tramp and Ursula with his Muses, Diablo, and Ursula 3, and passes the turn back to Alec. On Alec's turn, he shifts in a Lady 5 and agonizes over what characters to pick up, ultimately deciding to pick up 2 princes for maximum questing power. He spends his remaining ink to play the copy of the Prince and quest out of his characters, bringing his lore total to 18, and that Prince would be game if Donald's unable to remove it with a song or something. After a long think, he decides to trade into the Daisy Duck with his characters, the Diablo and the Ursula 2, and then he decides to sing with his Ursula 3 the Strength of the Raging Fire, which is in his hand, taking out the Lady 5 as well as the Gogo Tamago, and then using the Muses trigger to bounce the Prince back to Alec's hand. So it's effectively a board clear, though of course now he's in a position where he has to clear every single thing that Alec plays for the rest of the game. He uses the rest of his ink to play a Prince John and then quest out of his characters and passes the turn back to Alec. Alec has a very simple turn. He turns 3 ink sideways to play 3 the Prince. Your go, Donald. Donald draws a card for his turn, and because it's probably not a song, he decides to scoop it up. Game 2 goes to Alec. So in terms of what we learned here, I think, in this game, Donald didn't have the Diablo shift, which really hampered his ability to draw cards and find the answers that he needed for Alec's flood of characters. And ultimately, while he was able to play impactful cards like Ursula 3 and Muses, and he did get off a double song with the Strength of a Raging Fire, it ultimately came too little too late, not enough to take this game down because Alec just had too much pressure with his characters. Alright, game 3, let's skip the altar, let's get right into the action. Donald goes first. He inks a Headless Horseman 8, plays a Diablo 1, and sees a hand of Lady, Bobby Zimmerowski times 2, the Prince, Ursula 2, Mickey 4, and Daisy Duck. No Tramp, no Snowforts, by the way. I think at this point, Donald knows that Alec's not playing a Snowfort deck. Just a bunch of characters that plan to flood out. The only thing there that's able to kind of control what Donald's doing is the Mickey Mouse, so that's probably something that Alec has to hold on to and not ink. And so on his turn, he inks a Bobby Zimmerowski and plays the Daisy Duck and passes. Donald's turn, he inks a Bruno, plays an Ursula that will likely miss just to see the hand, and he sees the addition of Grandmother Willow. And unfortunately, he passes the turn, showing he does not have a Diablo shift. On Alec's turn, he decides to capitalize on the weakness. He inks a Bobby Zimmerowski, plays the Grandmother Willow, and plays the Prince, putting out maximum lore on the board. He decides to quest with his Daisy Duck because it's unlikely to get taken out, and he reveals a Diablo, passing the turn back to Donald. On Donald's turn, he inks the Diablo 2 that he just got off the Daisy Duck, plays an Ursula 3, and shifts in a Diablo. He had to discard a Let the Storm Rage On in the process to do it, which is quite interesting. I wonder what he's holding in his hand actually. He quests with his Diablo and passes the turn back to Alec. On Alex's turn, he decides that the Donald line was too suspect, so he decides to play an Ursula, and he shows that Donald does have a strength of a Raging Fire, and the rest of his hand is a Muses, and probably some other character, but it's off screen. Then he quests with his Daisy, revealing Pete going into Donald's hand. Then he decides to ink the Mickey Mouse to play a Daisy Duck and another big quester, I imagine. What's that card? Well, I'm going to say it's the Prince. Someone dropped that quest for 2. Because it's obvious here that Donald's basically just angling to draw a song to go with the Ursula 3 to take out as many characters as he can from Alex. So instead of trying to play a 2 quester that costs 4, he just plays two questers that cost 1 each. Logical play. He quests out with his characters. Of course, the Ursula can't quest because he just came in, and passes the turn back to Donald. On Donald's turn, he reveals one of the best top decks he could have drawn. He sings with his Ursula 3, Let the Storm Rage On. He decides to take out the Grandmother Willow and the Prince. Massive board swing, drawing 2 cards off of the double Ursula, and because he gets 2 more triggers from users because of the double song, he bounces Lady 1 and Daisy Duck back to Alex's hand, and then from the cards that he drew, he shows he also has a strength of a Raging Fire to take out the Daisy Duck, and he bounces the Ursula back with the Muses trigger off of that, and then passing the turn, completely obliterating Alex's board. From this point on, the game is super rough. Alex plays an Ursula, sees a whole bunch of non-songs, sighs, shakes his head. I mean, he's had it in his hands just now, right? Inks a Lilo to play Daisy, play Lady, just put out as much as he can, passes the turn. And from this point out, I just kind of want to watch the game a little bit quicker because there's kind of not much Alec can do. The big swing on that turn took all the steam out of his aggro deck's plan, and the value of Donald's deck starts taking over. So as we see here, he played a Max Goof, managed to do multiple sings to take out characters. I assume he just starts questing, drawing cards off of his Diablo, extra resources that would then be able to take advantage of the Muses as well. And so maybe as the game continues to play on, we can kind of see how the Emerald-Steel setup is able to combat Amber Emerald dogs, right? I mean, it's not exactly conventional Snowfort dogs deck. It's kind of a tramp dogs deck that doesn't look like maybe there's Shunnerbog. We haven't seen it yet. But the setup basically is Ursula 3 and Muses, because both of these are cards that Alec is unable to interact with because the dog's deck of present doesn't play any interaction. The only interaction that it could possibly play, it does play Shunnerbog, we just saw. Okay, so Alex on Shunnerdogs basically with actually no interesting choices. The only interesting choice he's playing is the Prince. But anyway, I digress. Back to the Emerald-Steel setup, we can see that it's Ursula 3 and it's Muses. Muses is able to bounce characters. Ursula 3 is able to get double songs going. Max Goof is able to save songs from an Ursula 2. And because the Amber Emerald decks of present don't really play any removal actions, the only removal action you could possibly play is Under the Sea, but then that's vulnerable to Ursula as well. That doesn't work. And so once you got that setup going, then it's pretty tough for the Amber Emerald player to come back into the game if he hasn't gained a significant amount of lore at that point. In this game, Alex didn't, and so he scoops to Donald, showing off the power of the Emerald-Steel deck against an Amber Emerald Shunnerdogs list. Alright, so that was the first of 2 best of 3s of Emerald-Steel played by Donald against some Amber Emerald Dog Snowfort style Shunnerdogs-ish aggro deck. I'm not going to talk about the second one. I mean, I skimmed through the games. Donald won 2-0, by the way, to make it to the finals, to eventually lose to Lorcana. And it's kind of like the same thing. It's more of the same. I suppose in this matchup, the opponent was playing Snowfort dogs with Snowforts, so the complexion of the matchup is slightly different. And of course, the has set my heart that is in Emerald-Steel list would be significantly more important, as hopefully I'm showing some highlights of right now as we skim through the games very quickly. But essentially, the principle of the matchup is the same. You try and get out an early Diablo shift. If you do, I'm sure your win rate goes up by like 30-40 percentage points, and if you don't, it drops to 30% to win the matchup. You try and set up a Ursula 3 into a Muses on 4, sing something, bounce something, take control of the game from there, use Muses to control the size of the opposing board, try and play your songs as quickly as you can to avoid getting Ursulat. Hold on to your max goose to be able to recur your songs, and in the meantime, as you clear their stuff, you quest out with your characters, your 2 questers, like your Prince Johns. So to answer the question set out at the start of the video, why is it that the best of 3 win rate for Emerald-Steel is so much better than its best of 1 win rate, which is just, 50-50? It comes down to, I think, 2 main things that are linked to each other. Firstly, as we've mentioned ad nauseum in this video, there are cards in the Emerald-Steel deck and there is a curve in the Emerald-Steel deck that is extremely good against dogs. And the thing about this nut curve is that dogs is not really set up to interact with it. As an Emerald-Steel player, you just try to go for this every single game. And the only thing that a dogs player can do is to take a song by Ursula, but of course you can top deck out of it, or you can recur a song with Max Goof. There's ways to play around it as Emerald-Steel. And the thing that makes it so much better in best of 3 is that you know your opponent when you're in your altar phase and when you're inking, even on the play, you just go for this nut line every single time. They have difficulty interacting with you. If you look for these cards and you play these cards and you hold on to them, you'll be able to win more games than not. And I think that's the reason why the delta is so big, because you have good cards, you know exactly the cards that you're looking for, and when you play these good cards, these are the reason why these cards are good, because dogs have a very big difficulty in interacting with them, and they also happen to completely demolish dogs' game plan. Interestingly, the Emerald-Steel dogs matchup is not the only Emerald-Steel matchup that has this peculiarity where the best of 3 win rate is significantly better than best of 1. If we look at Emerald-Steel Ruby Sapphire, in best of 1, it's performing at a middling 52% clip, but in best of 3, it wins 57% of the time. Green. 5%, that's pretty big delta. If we think about it, the reasons why are also down to matchup information playing a big role, though for slightly different reasons. In particular, with Ruby Sapphire, you need to know as Emerald-Steel whether or not they're playing any Brawls or Firefly Swarms, because those would be good against your Diablos and your Ursula 3s. Though, apart from that, in general, the discard plan with Prince John, Ursula 2, Ursula 3 singing Sudden Chill is quite effective against Ruby Sapphire, so you're more likely to want to go for those over Muses, the damage songs in Storm, Zeus, Strength, Pete's, and so forth. So that's it for this one. I thought it'd be fun to unpack this little data anomaly that I spotted when looking through Duel's Inc. matchup data. Hope you learned something about Emerald-Steel Dogs matchup, but also how matchup information plays a role in win rate very tangibly, as we see in this particular matchup, and also maybe to some degree how to read data or interpret the data and come up with plausible explanations as to why the data is the way it is, and then kind of test it by looking at games. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Cheers. Bye-bye.